Many thanks for this opportunity to speak about accessibility and service design. And I will do a focus on the tourism sector, as now accessible tourism is one of my research area. My background is in management science and especially in marketing. So sometimes I have some word from the marketing field, and you will see how we called some things may be different as in the other field. Today I will try to answer this question: why is inclusive innovation necessary today? And I will illustrate that with the tourism sector, as it is my main research area. So we will go to the evolution, go through the evolution of consumer profiles, also the role of consumers in innovation management, the innovation process for services. Then I will speak about the place of consumer with disabilities in design approaches in general, participatory research, and focus on the tourist sector, so the accessible tourism research. So first, why is inclusive innovation necessary? According to Fabry, 3 out of 4 innovation are failures, so that do not meet their markets. So there is a lot of loss. So resources loss with this fact of 75% of innovation that do not meet the market. Then social inclusion now is a major trend. We speak about diversity, minority, and also empowerment. And there is some limitation of conventional marketing approaches, particularly profiling and segmentation. And we will speak about the persona approach during this presentation. So also a focus on the tourism sector or the mobility sector. So this is an example of the train company in Switzerland. So in Switzerland, there is a law for people with disability, and the train company had 20 years to make this train station accessible. And they try to do it, but now not everything is accessible. So there are a lot of protests against the train company. And so this is also for the company a big issue to manage all these protests and these activists who make their voice heard. You probably know this scheme with desirability, viability, and feasibility. And at the center is innovation. I will try to explain how to reach this innovation with people with disability and accessibility. So the evolution of consumer profile. So before marketing, it was more a passive consumer targeted by goods and services. And now consumers are evolving into active consumers, sometimes activists, as we see in the last example for the train company, and also co-innovators. So we have the creative consumers who want to be involved in the creation of products and services. And for that, companies or organizations need new managerial approaches like co-innovation. So in the marketing literature, there are 6 consumer profiles with high potential for innovation. So the first one is the lead user by von Hippel, then the creative consumer, emergent nature consumer, user entrepreneur, innovators, and opinions leader. The role of consumer in innovation management. Consumer now participate in the innovation management process. For example, creative consumers or solution providers. But why do they innovate? They encounter different needs, and they have means and also resources to obtain personalized product. And for budgets, they also expect high benefits from this innovation. As I said, we need new managerial approach to innovate with consumer. So like open innovation from Chessbror, and also all the centered design methods like service design. So the innovation process for services. So as you say, as organizations and consumers are co-producers of service value. So if we have the example of hotel, so if you need advice, you go to the conciergerie and you speak with the conciergerie to get this advice. This is the co-production of the service. And it's also why we have this co-innovation based on this co-production of services. So we have all the user-centered design methods. Norman summarizes these methods in 4 steps. So observation, ideation, prototyping, and testing. And we know service design, but there is also design thinking and UX design, who are famous user-centered design methods. Now, what the place of people with disabilities in design approaches? First, designing with people with disabilities refers to self-representation, who is really important in the disability sector, is that people could self-represent themselves. Then we use user-centered design methods as innovation process. And there is specific approaches. The first one is universal design, which is based on 7 principles, focuses on designing products, services, and environments that can be used by everyone, and also an inclusive design process proposed by Holmes. So the 7 principles of universal design, the first one is equitable use, second, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, 4th is perceptible information, 5, tolerance for error, 6, low physical effort, and 7, size and space for approach and use. And as you see, all these principles are common sense, let's say. And if you check if your service or product match with this universal design principle, be useful for everyone. Then the inclusive design. So there are 3 principles proposed by Holmes. The first one is to recognize exclusion, then to learn from diversity, and then to solve for one and extend to many. So one example of this inclusive design is the subtitle for video, for example, in YouTube. So it was a thing for people with hearing impairments, but you can use if you have too much noise in your room or in the train to watch a video, and you can use this subtitle. Now I will speak about consumer empowerment. The notion of empowerment enables us to understand access to power as both a state or a goal, and also the process for achieving it. The empowerment process is a set of practices characterized by the pursuit of user empowerment and the transformation of the relationship between users and professionals. And for us as marketer is the transformation of the relationship between the consumer and the organization. There are different views in marketing, also often contradictory. So for some, empowerment means giving consumer permission to take control of certain aspects of the product or services. It could be the color, the price, or the design. And this is what we call the top-down movement. So it's the company who said, okay, you can choose the color, but not so much, let's say. And the other movement is the bottom-up, and then it's really the consumer who would like to free from the company. And Personally, I'm interested in the bottom-up movement because it retains the transformative goal of enabling people with disability to regain power. Then I will speak about participatory research. And the first notion that I would like to define is the participation. And for that, I retained the Einstein ladder of participation. And so Einstein is a sociologist, and she has made this ladder with 8 steps. And for Einstein, participation means power to decide. So if you do consultation is not participation. Information is not participation. Really, when you said, okay, the consumer can decide or has the power to decide, this is what is called participation. So also with our team here in SIER, we reflect on the user-centered design methods, and we repair some limits of user involvement. So first, user are informants prior to development in the step 1 observation. And here we are in the level 4. So it's not participation. And then we also user are testers of the proposed solution. And this is level 5. And the goal now is to reach level 6, where users have the power to decide, so to participate. So for that, we use now a collaborative action research. It's a process in which social actors are no longer as passive object of research or investigation, but are subject conducting research in collaboration with professional researchers. So the social groups concerned identify the issue, carry out critical analysis, and seek appropriate solutions. So we propose a transdisciplinary approach to co-innovation. It's based on the principle of collaborative action research. So first is the recognition of non-scientific knowledge, usage of their objective, professional and political, on equal terms with scientific knowledge. And the second principle is the participatory governance, so the power to decide. So to explain that in another way, so we have different spotlight on the situation, the usage spotlight, professional, academic, and political, and then we have a better view of the situation if we take into account all these different types of knowledge. So now I will do the focus on the tourist sector. So I'm back on the service design method we use and we develop here in SIER with Professor Emmanuel Franier. We work a lot on this method, and for us, so the fieldwork is the first step. So this is a picture of a kitchen in a deep foundation for deep blind people, and you see the device on the kitchen is to enable people to place their plate and to warm up, and this device do not exist on the market. So it was really as I was in the foundation discussing with deaf or blind people, and they explained me this device. Then the script phase with the blueprint, service blueprint, the staging. So always we do the staging with people with disabilities, as you see on the photos, and the production phase. So the goal for us is really that the innovation go into the market and alive for consumers. So we develop an audit tool for observation. This is based on universal design principle. So the goal is really to describe the situation and to use the universal design principle as audit. And and to say, okay, this is not okay because the size and spaces for approach and use is not okay. And then, so now also we recognize the non-scientific knowledge. So we try to build transdisciplinary teams. As you see the example of this project to create an inclusive culture network in Neuchâtel. So really with people with disability, also people of the culture, and they work together to create this network. And also the participatory governance. So with, like we said, the democracy. So it's people who prioritize the action plan for this network. And at the end, this example of the inclusive culture network in Neuchâtel, so people create the association without us. So we finish the mandate with this last meeting, and then let's say they were empowered and they create themselves this association. For us, it's a new service, so it's the goal of the service design, and they do it by themselves. As a conclusion, for me and for my colleague, we are now thinking for new tools for this transdisciplinary service design. So, for example, people with disability as co-designer with auto-ethnography or self-confrontation interview as new tools. People with disability as co-designer for the ideation and prototyping process. We would like to delete this persona tool and really to say there is always peer objective knowledge with us in the team and no more this persona tool. And also for the testing and prototyping, to do that with people with disability and not with actors. And also for the transdisciplinarity and participatory governance at the top of this transdisciplinary service design. And also for me, what is really important is to teach accessible tourism to tourist management students. They are the future manager of the tourism industry. We also write a chapter with my colleagues on the Swiss way of designing inclusive experiences. So you will find this reference at the end of my slides. For your attention, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. I really appreciate this approach of looking at the issue from a very wide perspective and then narrowing it down to on the process, like what is today, what are gaps in the process that is often used by service designers, and how can these processes be adapted with new things, with things to be removed. Very inspiring. Thank you so much. My first question for you, Benjamin. In a world that these days is very much focused on metrics, KPIs, money, especially with recessions coming sometimes again and again, how do you pitch this notion of accessibility as something that is valuable in a world where people are in urgency mode, in cost saving? Do you have maybe a few elements that can help other service designers pitch the value of of inclusive design, accessibility, and all of these things?
Yeah, first, accessibility is useful for everyone. So if it's accessible, let's say for wheelchair, it will be also accessible for child travelers. So let's say that it's never a problem for the other. Then there is the law, and now it's up to you to be accessible. Much more in the US, but it becomes now the case in Europe, and in Switzerland it will be the case. Then if you think accessible from the beginning, it costs really less than if you do the correction, let's say. So there are a lot of bonus to think about accessibility from scratch and when you design now a product or services to do that.
Thanks so much. I feel the whole legal point of view is also a very interesting one, especially in Switzerland where we like rules and regulations. It's one of those things like reminding people that there are, in fact, expectations from law and just making them visible sometimes is already a good push for motivating C-level people of saying, oh, we might have a compliance issue here, and that might be a serious problem. We have a question from Shalvi, and I'm excited to hear your question.
Thank you so much, Benjamin and Daniel. I think my question is a little bit upon what you guys were already talking about, the law and the legalities of it. But for example, for countries like India, where there's no strict law for accessibility design, how do you have any tips or how do you suggest we go ahead about it?
So first of all, I must precise that I'm not concerned by disability. So I don't have this activist view of design, let's say. As I saw in Switzerland, there are a lot of people who are really activists, who write in the newspaper, who make protests. And me, I'm more a researcher, so I will interview them to understand what are their needs. But yeah, I think it's people with disability who have to demonstrate, and also the society who has to evolve and to follow this movement. But as researcher and non-concerned people, yeah, I have another position regarding this aspect.
What I appreciate in your answer, Benjamin, is this aspect of saying, even if you're in the non-concerned, you still can use kind of your profession as a voice. As a researcher, you can go in the field, synthesize, summarize, give
Yeah,
back in academic papers. As a service designer, you might be able to do similar things or inspire through services that are, in fact, inclusive and accessible. As a storyteller, you might be able to use stories for that. And I feel the whole activist thing is also definitely a piece of the puzzle that is deeply important. Yes.
yeah. For me also as a teacher, so I really like to teach these things to students, and I always have welcome people with disability who present the challenge, for example, for accessible tourism, and who directly do the design with students. So at the end, much more facilitator between students and people with disability and the methods, then they do the work together. So it's also my point of view about this accessibility.
Thank you so much. I see that Layli has a question for you, Benjamin.
So, is my picture freeze because yours is?
We're still
Oh,
hearing you and everything is all right.
okay, perfect. Thank you for all you have done and you're doing and sharing it here. I feel there is sensitivity among people with disabilities about wanting to be like everyone else, but at the same time, some exceptions need to be made, especially in physical spaces, like to make participation easier for them. And somehow, actually, this boundary ends up being created unconsciously. My question is that do you think accessibility should be invisible when done well or proudly visible?
So for me, the now accessibility should be by design and no more an ad. For example, if you organize a conference, by design, you think about all the accessibility measure you need, and then even if there is one or no people with disability, there are all these accessibility measures who are provided. And then, yeah, there are different points of view about disability and accessibility. There is the first point of view is the medical model of disability. If you know it, it's much more individual problem. So people has to have this accessible device to come. Then there is the social model of disability, who is much more a societal problem, or a social construct also. And this is the society who has to adapt and make it accessible. Now there is the third approach is the identity model. And also for me now is a challenge to bring this identity model in accessible tourism. So really to understand what is, for example, a hiking for people with hearing disability, and to design a hiking for these people and not to make the hiking accessible. Really is the main challenge that I would like to to study now, is to go forward to go a step further in this identity model.
Thanks so much. We have another question which asks, how did you build and invite people to join your transdisciplinary team? So how did you build this team of all these experts, but also people who are affected, who have various disabilities?
We have a strong network in the region and collaboration with association of people with disability, also organization who welcome people with disabilities. Always we have this network. We do a phone call or email. Are you interested in participating in this project, research project, and so on?
And how did you first find those? Because that's always the thing when people are starting. Are you looking for specific types or sub branches? Do you look for how do you find the first round of people to join such a network? So there is the association route, you said. Is there other sides, maybe in academia or other approaches to build such a network?
So it's with the association, the professional also who work with people with disability. And but sometimes what is also difficult is that in the association, that it's always the same people who are, let's say, activists. To have a bigger network sometimes is an issue for us. That's it.
Inspiring. So to try to go beyond the activists is definitely something to look for. Thanks so much. We have another question which asks, have you collected along the way any principles to make a service accessible? X has some more specific than the 7 principle of universal design.
So for accessible tourism, there is ISO rules, no standardization or principle. I use these ISO standards also to teach, and let's say that everything is described in these ISO standards to make accessible tourism. So the universal design principle are described in these standards. Also the guideline for web accessibility are in this standard. So there are a lot of standards that exist, and we do not create new standards, but we use it for the observation and as, for example, the audit tool that I showed before.
So no need to reinvent the wheel, but instead using several wheels to then have a very strong car with many wheels of inspirations. Definitely a very important piece. We have someone saying, thank you so much, Benjamin, for sharing your research and experience. You mentioned in your presentation the transdisciplinary framework where the usage, professional, academic, and political sides are involved. Do you have a practical example of an initiative you could share how these different sides work together?
The inclusive network for culture in Neuchâtel was exactly done in this way. The transdisciplinary team was composed of people with disability, people from the culture industry, politics, or let's say, politics, and us as academia who lead the process to do it. I mentioned the article where we describe the project, and it's in French, but you can discover it.
And Google Translate is usually very good for getting the big ideas directly. I'd be curious to, so these are many different stakeholders brought together with very different agendas and also just calendars too. How many times do these people meet when you have these things? Do you split that in, oh, we first gonna meet one side, then another side? Or do you say we're gonna meet all together several times? Just for me to understand, like, how big is such a deep involvement, such a bottom-up involvement? Is that at the start, or is it just once at every stage of the process? How big or how small is that?
The principle of collaborative action research is first to meet with the group. So, for example, solely the people with disability, and they could prepare their arguments. And then you meet also the professional together and explain that there will be relation power in the meeting. So one rule is first to meet separately and then to mix to avoid the power problem. But this is in theory. But let's say that it's also a principle, and for that we also work with people of the social work who regularly have faced these issues and have also experience to lead transdisciplinary team. It's also, you need a lot of times to do that. And that is a problem for some projects, that you need times to meet people separately, then bringing them together, explain the power relation.
Thank you so much. For people who are joining us not from Switzerland, maybe a bit of a side story that I think will show a little bit of that culture of how these types of things are usually done in Switzerland. Is we have a culture where if we meet for a big meeting, a very important meeting, usually people meet one to one. You meet every stakeholder first for a coffee, and then you rehearse the big meeting all together. So this is also, I think, one of those very Swiss ways of preparing, where you first prepare every stakeholder and you make sure that the expectations and that the level of power that they get is very clearly said up front, so that then when everybody meets, it's more like a theater piece where everyone knows how far they can go, how little they can play, what is their take, what is not their place. And I think that's maybe also a bit particular to the Swiss way of doing politics, also management, but also accessibility. And so I really love this approach of the Swiss way of doing accessibility that you are sharing with us. I'd like to go with another question from the chat. Someone says, hello, Benjamin. Thank you for your fascinating presentation. You mentioned bottom-up consumer empowerment as consumer wanting to free themselves from the company organization as opposed to being co-innovators, co-producer. Is this type of empowerment ever positive for a company or an organization? Are there examples in do you have examples in mind where this has been positive for service design, for example?
So also all this research is based on an innovation program we had here in Switzerland. So it was the Innovation Booster Technology and Special Needs. And in this program, the goal was to create small teams to do innovation. And we set up rules. So the teams must be transdisciplinary, and a lot of teams were built solely with people with disability, academic, and then they bring company or they create their own organization or startup to develop the product. So yeah, also I could share the link on the Innovation Booster program. It was really a nice initiative during 4 years around innovation with people with disability.
Thanks so much. You're an academic, and I'd be curious to hear from your side two maybe recommendation. What is maybe one reference that you would pick on the topic of accessibility, inclusion, and so on, where you would say this is like the top level, maybe a bit difficult, maybe a bit serious, but this is very good. And then maybe do you have another reference, another source where you say this is maybe more in bottom down to earth language, but still very inspiring.
So for accessible tourism, there is a new book called Handbook for Accessible Tourism. So it's really now the Bible for us with, I think 300 pages around the accessibility and tourism. So let's say with that, you have everything. The ISO standards, it's technical, but it's not so fun, but it's good. The students don't like the ISO standards, but there is everything there. Maybe you can follow some activists on LinkedIn and so on. But there is people with disability who write every week in Switzerland. For example, Malik, who write every week about accessibility and disability. And that is maybe much more fun. It's in French, so for French guy. But if you find an activist who explain the problem, I think it's a good way to become familiar with accessibility.
Maybe because you're way too humble, I will add an additional source of knowledge here, which you have been a guest editor for Point, the Journal of Service Design. There was an edition, I think, around accessibility, inclusion, and all these things. And there is obviously you did a good work there also in selecting pieces, and I think there was also a piece that you co-wrote. So obviously you were way too humble to say it, but that's also a big source of inspiration. So if you go on the Service Design Network website, there is a whole section about Touchpoint. There is also a good old, but good still, search engine there where you can put your keywords, and then that brings you case studies, articles, events, and things like that, which could be obviously of big inspiration. We have a last question from someone who says, Benjamin, thank you so much for your talk. So accessibility tourism, it seems that everybody understands the importance of it. What is it around accessibility that other industries could learn from the tourism industry about accessibility?
Maybe for tourists, the goal is to create experience, positive experience for people with this, for everyone, let's say. And let's say that the other sector could also bring this experience to have a good experience for human resources or other sectors, let's say.
Thank you so much. A big thank you to you, Benjamin. It's been a pleasure to finally have a bit more of a conversation around that topic here in this stage. The important thing for me is to thank everyone who shared a question and inspiration in the chat or live here. And a big thank you to Benjamin for all of his work and all the inspirations that he shared with the community. A big thank you to all of you, and see you another time.